Hey everybody, welcome back to Library Says. My name is Jamie, and today I'm going to tell you about the weirdest books I've ever read. I actually got the idea for this video from Reagan at Peruse Project. I'll link her video down below. She recently did a video where she talked about some of the weirdest books she's ever read. Now, going through and making this list, I realized I haven't read that many weird books. So if I'm leaving off some obvious picks, please let me know in the comments down below what is your very favorite weird book ever. I have 8 books on this list, and some of them are debatably not weird. But I guess at the time, my experience reading them was weird. We're gonna give this a go. First and second on my list are books by Jeff Vandermeer. It is impossible to have a list of weird books without including him. He's basically the frontrunner of a new genre that is being called New Weird, which is like absurdist, sci-fi with elements of horror. Indescribable. Like, I don't know how I could possibly sell it to people except to say it's weird, but you'll probably like it. So, the first 2 books on the list are Annihilation, which is the first in the Area X trilogy, and Born. So, Annihilation is about a group of women who are being sent into an area called Area X that is walled off from the rest of the world. The world governments have sent in many expeditions of experts to explore Area X, but most of them have either not come back alive or they've come back fundamentally changed in some way. Now we're on, I think it's the 11th expedition, and our main character, we never learn her name, and her husband was a member of one of the previous expeditions, and he came home, but his personality was really different, and he didn't have any memory of his time in Area X. And so not only is she there to explore, but also to figure out what in the world happened to her husband. While she's there, there are spooky voices, weird creatures. There's this underground, other people are calling it a tunnel. She thinks of it as a tower that is under the ground, that is just a completely winding staircase. And when it's explored, there's writing along the wall, and there's some sort of creature that is doing the writing. And we don't know what's at the bottom of this tower/tunnel, if anything. Honestly, that is the whole plot. It's weird, it's exploration, it's horror. There's just this fundamental sense of wrongness the whole time you're reading. I loved it. I loved it. But I will say I have not yet picked up the sequel because while I really enjoyed it and have every intention of reading the next one and the third one, I needed a break. So I haven't picked up the second one just yet. The second book by Jeff Vandermeer that I also really enjoyed is Born. Now, this is the first book of his that I ever read, and it's about a woman named Rachel who lives in this post-apocalyptic world where most of society is taken over by this scientific-based corporation that produces weird crap. Meanwhile, there's also a giant flying polar bear, and Rachel is a scavenger, I think. And one day while she's scavenging, she finds this small, sentient, plant-like creature, which she decides to name Born. And Born can speak. So Born's almost like a pet initially. And the whole book follows Rachel and Born's relationship as Born grows and evolves and becomes something else. And Rachel is surviving in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and we find out more and more about the corporation that's basically in charge of everything, and the polar bear, and again, hard to describe. I don't really know how to sell this except to say that it's weird and it's unsettling, and I was just utterly fascinated the entire time I was reading. Next up is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is sort of thriller-y. It's like a mystery thriller, horror elements, and it's just very strange. So this one follows a man who is investigating the alleged suicide of the daughter of a famous horror movie director and writer, I think. He had this cult following, and there's strange circumstances surrounding the suicide of his daughter. So this man, our main character, is investigating and ends up sort of submerging himself into the underground world of this cult horror movie thing. It's told like a novel, but then there's also photos, web pages, and redacted documents and interviews. And I listened to the audiobook actually of this one and loved it. It's so submersive, but it's also very weird. And the whole time it's ominous and creepy, and I really don't want to tell you any more than that because the less you know, the more you'll enjoy it, I guarantee it. Next up is The Bees by Lilene Paul. Best description for this novel is Handmaid's Tale, but with bees. Want to read it? For real, this is about bees. Like, the characters are all bees in a bee hive. So this colony, and you follow a worker bee who's born like they're essentially part of a caste system. So there's the worker bees, and there's more levels above the workers, all the way up to the queen, who of course rules the whole hive. And we follow her as she lives her life as a worker bee, but then starts to have aspirations for greatness. And there is no room for aspirations in the hive. And it is so mind-blowing, and it speaks to humanity so well, and everything is so relatable, and you know exactly what our characters are feeling, and you can relate to every experience, but they're bees. I literally cannot. Just please read it so I can talk to somebody about it. No one I know has read this book. It is such a discussion piece. But it's weird. I mean, it's fundamentally weird. It's about bees. Next up is Sourdough by Robin Sloan. This book is about bread, basically. So we're following a character who gets a sourdough starter from the men who run the, I think, Indian restaurant that is below her apartment. And she starts baking sourdough and becomes obsessed with sourdough and works really hard to get a spot at this very selective, artsy sort of market where she can start selling sourdough, which introduces her to a almost secretive world of artisanal stuff, coffee, breads, jams and honeys, and it's this very cutthroat boys club almost. It's so strange. Meanwhile, her sourdough starter has a personality. It's almost like it's alive, and it's a character in its own right. So there's definitely elements of magical realism. I really, truly do not want to tell you anymore. That's the problem with all of these books, is if I really tell you too much, all of the mystique is gone. And we don't want that. So I'm just gonna give you enough, hopefully whet your appetite. So go read Sourdough. Okay, here's another one that I read this year, and it is Bunny by Mona Awad. Bunny follows a young woman who is at a university studying creative writing. In her small creative writing, I think it's like an MFA, in her small MFA program, there is this clique of like mean girls, essentially. And they call themselves the Bunnies. They each call each other Bunny, like as a nickname back and forth to each other. Our main character is on the outs of this group until she gets an invite in. There may or may not be murder. There may or may not be witchcraft, dark magic, and there may or may not be people turning into animals in this book. And that's literally all I'm gonna tell you. It might be drugs, it might be mental illness, it might actually be happening. Read this book. Very strange, but I really enjoyed the ride. Okay, then the next one on this list, probably you've already read. It's a classic for a reason, but it's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is the first in a series and is the only one of the series I have read, and it is very English. Its sense of humor and writing style, very, very English. But it is about a man whose house is about to be knocked down for a state-run interstate, like a road, to be put up where his house is. Thus begins the great adventure. He goes to space. There are aliens. Then we find out that our planet is actually about to be demolished for an intergalactic highway to go up where it is. We find out the meaning of life in this book too, if you don't already know. You will find out the meaning of life in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's all I've got. That's all I've got for you, but you should probably read it if you haven't, because where have you been? Next up is a YA book called Bleeding Violet by Dia Reeves. I read this many years ago, but it definitely stuck with me. It's about a girl named Hannah who has hallucinations and has been medicated up to her eyeballs for it. And she's the weird girl, and she's sick of always being the outcast. So she she runs away to a town called Portero in Texas. But Portero is a weird place. She soon learns. There are secrets, the town is hiding, there's a lot going on in this town, and she is no longer the weirdest girl that she knows. There's a magical element. It's hard because she suffers from hallucinations. Is she hallucinating, or are all of these things actually happening? That's kind of the driving force of the whole book. And I loved it, and it's weird, and I had a great time. The last book on my list is The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. This is also a weird one. It's definitely magical realism. This book follows not only Ava Lavender, but many generations of lavender women who are cursed to fall into foolish love. They fall for the wrong guy, and they have bad stuff happen as a result. You do start many generations back from Ava, and you work your way, so you don't even really meet Ava or have her story until late in the book. But she's born with wings. There's a character who turns into a bird. And I think what makes it weird is that these elements are so seamlessly intertwined into otherwise realistic settings, realistic time periods, realistic characters. And so it's just off-putting enough. It's beautifully written on top of that. So highly recommend this one if you haven't already checked it out. And that is it. Those are the weirdest books I've ever read. So I know some of those you might not even consider weird, honestly. And that's fine. Let me know down below what you think of these books and what are some of the weirdest books you've ever read. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.